Hi everyone, Susan Storm here, and today we are going to be talking about the auxiliary function in your Myers-Briggs personality type. I will be joined shortly by our ENFJ friend Denzel Mensa. We've been doing a series recently, just started, on the different placements in your cognitive function stack. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about the dominant function of your personality type. This is the function that you live and breathe most naturally, and today we're digging into the auxiliary function. Other people sometimes call this the co-pilot. That's personality hackers term for it. Um, and if you are a big fan of John Beebe's 8-function model, then he calls this function the mother-father function. Hi, Gotcha. I'm glad you're here again. I love seeing familiar names and faces. And if you're just tuning in, I just want you to know, as we're going through this presentation today on the auxiliary function, I want to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts. I want you to be part of this live stream because this is about not just me explaining something to you, but hearing your own experiences with maybe your own auxiliary function. So, hi DJ, glad to see you again. Hi Linda, great to have you here. Thank you everyone who's joining. If you want to say hello, I'd love to say hi to you. And again, ask us questions. Denzel will be here soon. I have INTJ preferences, he has ENTJ preferences, and we've been working in type for many, many years. So we are excited to be able to interact with you one-on-one and be able to help in broadening the understanding of your personality type or perhaps someone's personality type that you know. Hi, Mike. Glad to have you here. Good afternoon. So we're just waiting a few minutes for people to pop on, and we're waiting for Denzel to join us, and then we'll be jumping right into exploring the auxiliary function. So if you're new to cognitive functions and you're not even quite sure what those are or what we're talking about, you can also access past live streams where you can see in-depth video talks me and Denzel have done about each of the cognitive functions. There's 8 different cognitive functions. There's extroverted feeling, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, extroverted and introverted sensing, and extroverted and introverted intuition. If you're not sure, if you hear us talking about that and you're really not sure what that means, you can always go to my YouTube page and look at the live streams that we've aired in the past. There's a specific tab for live streams, and you can get an in-depth viewing of us exploring those cognitive functions in depth. And DJ, again, great to have you here. I love seeing some of you have come, really taken the time out of your schedule to come frequently, and that means a lot to me. It's a real encouragement to me that you're coming again and again. Means I must not be doing too bad of a job, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I think I'll go ahead, since we are a few minutes past time, I will go ahead and start the presentation. I know Denzel will be here really soon. So I'm going to go ahead and open up these slides on the auxiliary function here. All right, so if you're new to type and you're not sure what the auxiliary function is, it's one of your cognitive functions, and it's the second one in your function stack. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the dominant function, and that is your primary, your like main heroic function. It's the one you live and breathe most readily. It's the one that is usually the most natural for you. Auxiliary is also very natural for you, but not quite as much as the dominant function. It's one of your cognitive functions. And again, if you're new to cognitive functions, it's just a fancy way of saying it's one of the ways you use your brain to perceive information, to prioritize information for decisions. So we went over what the cognitive functions are last week. I have a lot of this information still in today's presentation, but I'm going to really go through it quickly because otherwise it's going to be repetitive for anyone who has been coming again and again. So there's 4 basic functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. And they each have a different direction, extroverted or introverted. So a lot of times you'll hear people in type using terms like SI, FE, TI, or NE. And this is basically saying what the function is, whether it's sensing, feeling, thinking, or intuition, and what direction it's orientated towards. So I for introverted, E for extroverted. Introverted functions are directed at the inner world. And again, I'm moving past this quickly. If you want to get more into this in depth, you can look at our session from 2 weeks ago where we get into this more fully. So introverted functions are directed inwardly. Extroverted functions are directed at the external world. And then here's an example of a cognitive function stack. So the dominant function, this is an ENFJ's cognitive function stack, and their dominant function is extroverted feeling, auxiliary is introverted intuition, and Denzel's here. Hi, Denzel.
Hello.
Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, am I? Am I?
That's always so
Really?
frustrating. I know I've done that before. Or at least I'm not hearing Denzel. Let me see if yeah, my speakers are working, so we'll give him a chance to oh, you do hear him. Okay. So maybe it was just my speakers that are the problem. I just tested them. Let me see. Hang on just a minute here.
Is it working now?
Okay, Denzel, I think it's actually my problem.
Oh.
So I don't know why, but for some reason I'm not hearing you, but everyone else is. So I'm trying to, while I try to work that out, why don't you give people an introduction to who you are and how they can find out more about you? And I'll try to get my audio working so I can hear hear what you're saying.
Sounds good. Well, she can't hear me, but okay. Sorry for the tardiness, y'all. Had a lot going on today. But yeah, I'm Denzel Mensa. I'm an ENFJ, 9-wing 1, social sexual in the Enneagram. I am a life, personal development, and relationship coach. Some of you might already know me, not only from like past live streams, but I also have my own YouTube channel where I like to talk about typology, but I also like to talk about a lot of other things like philosophical concepts, spiritual beliefs, and anything really having to do with interpersonal dynamics. I'm very intrigued with those. So, yeah, that's essentially the gist, the elevator pitch of who I am. I'm assuming that Susan still can't hear me. So, and now she's muted herself, so can't really hear her. But I see that I don't know if she intentionally or unintentionally chose the ENFJ cognitive function stack to go through. But yeah, today we are going through the auxiliary function. Last week we did the dominant function. And I think the auxiliary is very interesting to go through because for me, I believe that the auxiliary function is the most important function to develop because then that's what oils up the rest of the car or rest of the car. It oils up like the rest of the functions that you're working with. So, for example, in the ENFJ, as we see over here, you have extroverted feeling as a dominant function, and then you have introverted intuition as an auxiliary function, then you have extroverted sensing as a tertiary, and then introverted thinking as the inferior. I see it as like if you are developing your auxiliary function, so with this case, the ENFJ, if you're developing your introverted intuition, then not only are you, Susan just messaged me, Hayden's, I don't know why, but I can't hear you. Okay, so we might have to restart the stream so that way Susan can figure out what's going on. So
Hey everyone. I am so sorry about that. I'm gonna have Denzel's gonna try to get back on here in just a minute, and we'll see if I can hear him. If not, I'm just gonna switch to a different computer, and hopefully that will work. I'm not sure why it's not working. If you can hear me, just give me a thumbs up so that I can be sure that my audio is coming through okay, and we'll see if we can get this started. It's one of those issues with live streams is having technical problems really on the spot. But Denzel's going to be jumping on here really soon, and hopefully this time everything will work fine. I had my ESTP husband come and mess around with my settings, so we'll see if that works. Let me go ahead and put the slides back up. And again, if Denzel jumps back on and I still can't hear him, I might have to disconnect again, and then I'm just going to switch to a different computer, and that should work. So again, my apologies for the confusion and chaos here. We will get past it. All right, Denzel is here. Can you talk?
Can you hear me?
Okay, it's still not working for me. Okay, so I'm just gonna switch computers to my laptop, and that one usually works. So I'm so sorry, everyone. We're gonna have to shut it down again for a minute. I'm gonna switch my computer as fast as I can, and we'll come back, and I'll be on a different computer. Thanks, everyone. I'll be right back. Okay, let's try again. Take 3. Denzel is going to be rejoining us in a minute, and hopefully on this other computer, the sound will work properly. We'll see. Thank you everyone who stuck around and was patient through this. I know it's annoying and everyone's time is limited, so I really appreciate it. And we'll be able to get started. Once we get past this little roadblock, we'll be able to move forward and explore the auxiliary functions. While we're waiting for Denzel, if anyone wants to pop their personality preferences into the comments, that would be awesome, because we can talk about maybe the auxiliary functions we're dealing with the people here who are watching today. So I think, DJ, I think you said you have INFP preferences, but I don't want to actually announce all that because I don't know if everyone wants that shared. So feel free to share your personality preferences in the comments so that we can maybe more specifically address your questions. We got two INFPs. Wow. Welcome, Louise and DJ, the INFPs in the group. I'm curious if there's more INFPs here. Love to have you here. INFPs are one of my favorite personality types, actually. One of the most influential people in my life was an INFP, and made a huge impact on my life. So just texting Denzel, so he should be jumping on soon. And Mike, an INTP. Wow, so lots of auxiliary extroverted intuition watching right now. And I actually just posted an article today on my blog, psychologyjunkie.com, and it's talking about the types when they're mentoring people. And one of the things we'll talk about today is how the auxiliary function is often what we use when we're mentoring other people and supporting them. And Denzel is here, and I hope I can hear you. Yes.
No, I'm just
kidding. I can hear you. I was so relieved. I was like, okay, it better work on my laptop.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah.
Got you.
I don't know what was going on, because every other sound and test we were doing was showing everything fine, but it was only StreamYard that was our streaming service that was having the issue. But we're back. Thank you, Denzel, for being here. I know you probably gave people information and I don't know what it was, but okay. So yeah. You probably don't need to reintroduce yourself, but thank you for your patience, Denzel, as I worked this out. And I was just talking with the people who were watching about their auxiliary functions. We have 2 INPs here, so lots of auxiliary extroverted intuition. I see Linda, an ENFP, so auxiliary introverted feeling. So fun to see the variety of different types that tune in. And we're going to get into what the auxiliary function looks like for each of the personality types. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back up the slide, but we're kind of speeding through the first part because it's really overview of what we went over 2 weeks ago. So I'm just going to jump past what we already went through. We were looking at, this is an example of a cognitive function stack, the ENFJ's function stack. And as you can see, the auxiliary function is the second one in the stack. And also see we have an INFJ watching. Hello, Michelle. Hi, G. And this is another example of a function stack, although it's set up very differently from the previous one. This is BB's function stack, and it shows the auxiliary function as the mother-father. And this function is one of the arms of your personality type, which means this is one of the functions you use when you're supporting other people, supporting yourself, and interacting with others. All right, we're going to jump past what we went through 2 weeks ago, but if you are seeing me skip past a lot of these slides and you're like, wait, I want to know what was on that, then you can go to the lives on my YouTube page and watch the one about the dominant function from 2 weeks ago, and you'll be able to access all that information right there where we get into this a lot more deeply. So the arms of the personality type. This is your auxiliary and tertiary function. These are associated with your relationships to the outer world, particularly with other people. So John Beebe says that the arms axes are about ways of caring for and being cared for by others, about relating and interacting. And Katya, I'm glad you liked the article I published today. I was just telling everyone I published an article today about the types and how they mentor. And the auxiliary function can show up a lot in the way that we mentor and guide other people. According to type theory, the auxiliary function is one that we often use to support, guide, and nurture others. So you'll see that flavor coming out a lot in the way that we mentor people. And if you want to see more about that, you can go to my website and look at the latest post there. All right, so this function, the auxiliary function, is the function that supports and protects the personality. At its best, it is supportive, nurturing, and protective. If it's inflated, it becomes overprotective, patronizing, or parenting when it's not appropriate. And when we mean inflated, we mean it's you may be over focusing on it to the expense of your other functions. So let's say you are an INFJ, but you have to spend a lot of your time dealing with other people. You're not getting enough time alone. So you're leaning really heavily on your extroverted feeling. And you start believing that it's really the way every decision should be solved, is using extroverted feeling. It's basically become inflated. You are over relying on it. And when that happens, it can show up in this kind of overprotective, patronizing way, or like they said, parenting when it's not appropriate, and kind of seeing it similarly to how the dominant function looks when it's inflated, as the answer to everything. But typically, the auxiliary function is going to show up in a really nurturing, supportive, protective way. I'm going to jump to Denzel really quick and see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that BB's model really shows a good a good archetype of how each function shows up. And so I'm actually glad that we're using it, because yeah, I do see a lot of people using their auxiliary function as like more of like a parenting style for everybody else. And sometimes, or oftentimes, according to BB, you're supposed to now learn how to use it to also include yourself in the way that you're helping like other people. And I see the auxiliary function as like, when that's really developed, then every other function is also working very well. Like now, I just always think of The Incredibles, and I always think of Mr. Incredible as the dominant, and then Mrs. Incredible as the auxiliary. And when she was brought into the picture, when she was not only helping the dominant, but then she was also keeping Violet and Dash in check and stuff like that, and like really, like she was pretty much like the glue that kept everything together. But when the hero, Mr. Incredible, tries to do things by himself, then it's like, dude, you're kind of like, you're doing a lot, but like you're doing a lot, and it's not until like you really include the auxiliary, then yeah, like a lot of great stuff starts to happen.
Thank you, Denzel. I think that's an amazing example. I never thought of it in terms of The Incredibles before, but the more I think about it, the more perfect that is as an example. And yeah, so one thing that you'll see a lot in stereotypes, or in unhealthy communication about type. If you're in a lot of like Facebook groups about personality types, you'll see a lot of people really bashing other personality types, particularly in the realm of like, oh, these types are really selfish, or these types aren't, or these types care more about people and these types don't. And one thing I love about the auxiliary function, especially in BB's model, is that we all show we care through this function. This is the way that we support and nurture people. It just looks different depending on which personality type you're interacting with. So this is kind of evidence that there's no caring or uncaring personality types, no nice or not nice personality types. Just the way that you show kindness is going to be different depending on who you are. If you're an ENFJ like Denzel, a lot of the way that you're going to support people is through introverted intuition, which is getting insights about people, seeing a pattern for them, seeing some kind of potential that they could work towards, really looking underneath the surface with people and inspiring them to see more deeply. If you're an INTJ like me, then I tend to help people through, my voice got mixed up, help people through extroverted thinking, which is more about managing, looking at metrics, seeing what will work, problem solving, and troubleshooting. And so the way that different people show support to others is different, but it's all coming from the same place of wanting to support other people. And so I think it's really important to understand not only your own auxiliary function, but especially in relationships. It's really important. So many times couples get into fights because, say, one partner's trying to take care of the other partner through thinking, maybe that's their auxiliary function, and the other partner wants to receive love through feeling. And then the the partner who wants to receive love through feeling thinks the other partner is being mean, when really they're trying as hard as they can to help, but it's not being received with the intention that it's being given. When we understand the cognitive functions and where they are in your placement and what that means, it can resolve so many relationship difficulties and so many family difficulties. And so that's why I think this is one of the most important series that me and Denzel will probably ever do, because understanding dysfunction is paramount to understanding the way that all the people in your life will most naturally show you they care. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox about that now, and we can move on to the next slide. So this is a quote from Mark Hunziker, who he's an analyst of Jung, an analyst of Beebe's model. He said, along with our actual parents, our best leaders manifest this role, the auxiliary function, towards those in their charge, shielding them from non-productive criticisms and pressures, keeping them from making unnecessary risks, and providing the information and tools that enable them to succeed. So a lot of times when you see parents or you see leaders taking care of people and trying to support and nurture people, there's going to be a strong flavor of the auxiliary function. And that brings us to a good question that Michelle asks. Michelle asked, which function do we want to receive love through? And while I think we want to receive love in many, many different ways that lie beyond the bounds of type, the tertiary function, which we'll get into next week, that's the function that we typically want to receive love through. So if you have tertiary extroverted feeling, for example, if you are an ENTP or ESTP, those types tend to really enjoy getting extroverted feeling support from other people. And we'll get way more into that in our next session when we get into the tertiary function. But that's really helpful to know. And I'm really excited to get into that. So thanks for asking that really good question. And the energy cost. Our last session, we talked about the energy of the dominant function, how it's so natural for us to use that it doesn't take much energy for us to use it. We can use all 8 cognitive functions. If you're an ENFP, you can use introverted sensing, and you do all the time. But it takes more conscious energy than using something like extroverted intuition. Using the auxiliary function expends more energy than the dominant because it's in the opposite orientation to your dominant function. So if you're an introverted personality type, your auxiliary function will be extroverted. If you're an extroverted personality type, your auxiliary function will be introverted. So we have a lot of INFPs here. And so INFPs have dominant introverted feeling, but auxiliary extroverted intuition. And so sometimes there's a temptation to stay in an introverted space and not go to an extroverted space. And that can result in us kind of ignoring and bypassing the auxiliary function. And I'm going to ask Denzel, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I feel like when we really get into the auxiliary function, then it's it's what balances us. It's like literally when you hear people talk about like, oh, I'm an ambivert, then that's where like it's mainly because they've developed their auxiliary function enough to where now they are both able to have their extroverted and their introverted function like kind of like be almost like even in a way to where like they're like, okay, no, like I can see how I enter both ways. And I think that when we use our auxiliary function, then kind of like what it's saying here, like the energy cost, then if you're using it properly, then it's actually preserving more energy for you, in my opinion. Like a lot of INFJs might think that, oh, extroverted feeling, it's actually costing me a lot of energy. But in actuality, and I think that we talked about this last week, when you really get into your extroverted feeling function as an INFJ or an ISFJ, and you're not using it only to parent, as in like, oh, I need to serve these people, I need to serve these people, I need to like help these people in this way, which is a more exhausting way to use extroverted feeling, but instead you're using it as a way to like connect intimately with people. Now it's becoming like rewarding. Now you're not going to be as jaded, like usually like you get in that NITI loop or SITI loop, and then you start thinking, oh, life is hopeless. You have the existential crisis because it's like, oh my goodness, like there's nothing to like live for. And then all of a sudden you meet a friend that you really deeply connect with, and it's like, wow, this is what life is all about. And you wouldn't be able to do that without your FE. Now, if you're only using the FE to like just help people, but you're not really like getting intimacy with the person, which is what FE, in my opinion, is actually looking for, then yes, it's going to be draining. And now you're like, oh, that costed so much energy. But in reality, if you're intimately connecting with the person, and I've seen this happen so many times with IFJs, when they're intimately connecting with people and they're not on serve mode instead, then they can go on for hours. And they even talk about like, wow, it's almost as if I was gaining energy from using this, and that's never really happened before. So I think that's one of the ways that how I view the auxiliary, because it's the same way that goes with like every auxiliary function. If you're using it properly, then it actually provides you more energy, or it helps you sustain the energy that you've actually already been that you've already had.
Thank you, Denzel. That's a wonderful example, and I've noticed that as well. A lot of times, if we have to only half use our auxiliary, like as you were describing with INFJs, where yeah, they're helping people a lot, they're maybe listening a lot to other people and expending a lot of energy for other people. But if there's no meaning in it, if there's no intimacy in it, it's ultimately exhausting for them. And that's how it is for, I think, every auxiliary function. So for me as an ITJ, and I don't know if there's any other ITJs watching, if I'm using extroverted thinking to just serve and serve and serve, but I'm not actually putting it towards anything meaningful, then it is also exhausting. I think every human wants a level of meaning and purpose beyond what they're doing. And I see a question or a statement from Katja. So basically those people who say they're ambivert are developing still their auxiliary function, or they are not just clear yet how to use it. I would say, yeah, a lot of the people who are saying I'm not an introvert or an extrovert, I'm an ambivert, it's actually probably that they are developing both their dominant and auxiliary, which is a good thing. If you feel like an ambivert, it's probably a sign that you're in a better place, because that means that you have a healthy relationship with your introverted functions as well as your extroverted functions. So we all should feel a little bit like ambiverts, because we aren't pure extroverts or pure introverts. I think Carl Jung famously said there is no such thing as a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. Such a person would belong in an asylum or something like that. We all need to have interaction with others and the world around us, and we all need to look inward as well. And then I noticed Linda said, I don't seem to use SI much. SI is introverted sensing, ENFP. So yeah, as an ENFP, introverted sensing is one of those functions that it's maybe not at the forefront of how you live your life, but I bet if you took it away, you'd notice its absence. So introverted sensing is, recalling past memories and using that to guide you, or traditions and routines, and noticing details that have significant personal meaning. And so I think it's one of those things that a lot of times we don't see it, that we are using it, just like we don't necessarily notice all the times that we're using our left hand, but we still do use all those functions every day. It's just that, some of them are less obvious to us. Or they're maybe less valued, like the input that they give us is less valued, and we override it with input from our other functions. Okay, so another quote about the auxiliary function. In situations that fit the mother-father pattern, actual parenting, counseling, being someone's boss or mentor or a CEO, we will tend to do so through our second function attitude skill set, whether it's well-suited or not. So maybe you're watching this and you're a parent, and you notice that the way you take care of your kids, let's say we have a lot of INFPs here, or an INTP. So the way that you take care of and support your kids is probably highly flavored by extroverted intuition, harnessing their imagination, helping them think outside the box, posing what-if creative scenarios to them. When things are going badly for your child, you're likely to pose other possibilities to them and help open the windows of possibility for them. And there's so many ways that can show up. Denzel, any thoughts on this in ways you've seen this show up, maybe in the workplace, in college, or in your family?
Yeah, I'm actually wondering too, like if I feel like this is actually a little bit new for me. So I was actually like listening and I'm like, huh, like in actual like parenting, like I feel like, yeah, I guess yeah, I'm really trying to like think of like if there's been a pattern that I've seen with that, because even coming into BB's model, it's one of the things that I've still been kind of like searching for. Like for example, like sometimes like I would even think to myself like, oh, like but I'm an FE dom, like so FE is not the way that I like serve people in this way, but then I see how it really is like the NI that's like giving the vision more frequently, and like that's how that could be. So I feel like that could be like one of the things, like it depends on the parent, but maybe if you have like an INTJ parent, then perhaps like one of the ways that they're doing this is they're actually setting up your future for you. Like they're putting like all of the things in place, like structurally. Whereas maybe if you had an ENTJ parent, then they're kind of like providing you the insight and the vision to be able to get up ahead, but they're not really like setting it up for you. So I don't know. Like that's something that I'm like looking at right now, and I'm like, huh. Like I honestly speaking, I'd need like more pattern recognition for that one, or
Yeah,
to see more of that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of talk is really given to the auxiliary function, and there's a lot more that could be said about it than what is commonly known. We talk about it being support for the dominant, and we talk about it being, the opposite orientation from the dominant, but there's really a lot more you can get from it. And your auxiliary function, when you take care of other people with it, it's still going to have flavor from your dominant function. It's not like your dominant function is just going to go check out and take a nap, but it's going to be able to get a little bit of break while the extroverted feeling takes the wheel in these situations. um so here's another quote. This is from Joel Mark Witt and Antonia Dodge from Personality Hacker, and they call this the co-pilot. If you are deeply introverted, you may avoid your extroverted co-pilot to evade a scary outer world that gives you sensory overload or negative feedback that makes you feel like your thoughts and feelings are wrong and that you aren't enough. On the other hand, if you are highly extroverted, your introverted co-pilot may force you to face uncomfortable introspection, including painful memories, trauma you haven't worked through, or unfamiliar and unexplored parts of yourself. So, one thing that can happen is people can get into what's called a loop, where they go back and forth between their dominant and tertiary function. And usually that stems from this exact dilemma that Joel Marquardt and Antonia Dodge are talking about in this quote. If you're an introvert, for example, you've had so many negative outer world interactions and you find the external world so overstimulating and overwhelming that you think to yourself, I'm just going to pull inward and stay in an introverted place. So for an INTP, this could look like looping back and forth between introverted thinking and introverted sensing. And I've actually seen certain INTPs mistype as ISTJs because they're so in touch with their introverted sensing and extroverted intuition. So an INTP in an introverted loop will not be using their extroverted intuition as much, their auxiliary function as much. Instead, they're staying in this place of analysis and thought and the inner details of their lives and traditions and rituals and comforting routines, and they kind of get stuck in a rut where they're not interacting externally, they're not testing their ideas in the real world. So the auxiliary function is very important, because if we get into a loop, we end up having these warped functions, we end up being more exaggerated versions of ourselves, and we end up being much less productive. If we're the introvert, we have lots of ideas, but we're not actually testing them. If we're an extrovert, we're too reckless, we're too impulsive, we're not taking time to think and process and analyze. So it's very important to have a good relationship with your auxiliary function. And we often think the auxiliary function is for someone's own good. Like, this is what's best for others. This is what people need. I know I've gotten into arguments with my husband sometimes, and I'm not throwing him under the bus, where a problem will come up and I immediately start trying to solve it through extroverted thinking. Well, here's what we should do. I've thought about your problem and I've come up with this plan specifically. I've laid out a sequence of how we should go about it, and I'll be talking about it a lot. But as an ESTP, he wants to be taken care of through extroverted feeling. So I'm throwing extroverted thinking at him, and that's not exactly the best way, especially as we get further into the function stack. You'll see that extroverted thinking for an ESTP is actually their critical parent function. So as I'm trying to offer support, he's interpreting it in this very critical, condescending way, when not seeing that I meant it in a helpful way. Now, we were able to work through that and get it all understood, so that's not an issue anymore. But this is really important. Sometimes you naturally think, well, why aren't people accepting all my advice? Why aren't people accepting my help? Well, it's because they didn't actually want that kind of help at that moment, maybe. They wanted some other kind of help. But if we understand this and we understand type, we suddenly have this almost magic toolbox for being able to reach people the way they want actually to be reached. And I see Mike has a comment. He says, "This is very accurate. I get into those TISI loops, which leads to a rut at times." Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think everyone gets into a loop sometimes. I think there's some people say, well, only some people get. I think everyone has unhealthy moments. I think everyone gets into a loop at some point in their life. Sometimes even an introvert can get into an extroverted loop, but we aren't going to get into that now. So I think it's great when you know about it to be able to see it, acknowledge it, and then have a way to fix it. We have a question from G. Any case where someone is overdoing their auxiliary because of gender, cultural roles, so you don't get to indulge the dominant function as often? And that's a really good question. I believe so. And I'd love to hear Denzel's thoughts on this. I'll just say, I've seen this in Asian culture, for example, where it's like in certain Asian countries, it's more ideal to be more introverted. So if you're an extrovert, you're over leaning on your introverted auxiliary function. And so they don't get to, an ESFP, for example, in Japan, might not really be able to lean on extroverted sensing as much. They might not be able to really live it as much without getting criticism because it's a more introverted, studious kind of culture. What do you think, Denzel?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting when we think about culture in that way too, because now, like, once again, you can have I guess an INFJ. Like, this could be like a really easy example where they're really, really, really all about like just the FE, the FE, the FE with people, but it's more it's more FE in a way that might not be as deep, and that's where the NI is not really like coming in as deeply. So it's like, okay, you have like a lot of friends, a lot of acquaintances, you're nice to everybody, but you're not bringing in enough of who you really are. You're not bringing in enough of your own insight, though, like, because you're afraid of like being seen as weird, maybe, and stuff like that. And so then, like, you're kind of like overdoing it in that way. Yeah, that's one of the ideas that I'm having. Like, whereas like somebody could be doing it. However, I'm thinking of that gender role idea, and I feel like, honestly, maybe like guy INTJs, for example, like where they overdo their extroverted thinking, and they're just constantly doing it in a way where it's even almost like probably detrimental to them, because extroverted thinking, like when it's done properly, is still tethered to their introverted feeling, but maybe they have neglected their introverted feeling so much. And even though it's their tertiary, which once again we're going to talk about um in the following stream, but like even though they're like their introverted feeling is like tertiary, they're still supposed to like go back to it in some way and make sure their extroverted thinking is like in alignment with it, so that they're doing things that's actually like reflecting their emotional state in a way, or like like their values and stuff like that, and not just like working and not checking in with themselves in some way. But they might think that they have to keep on working because they're a male in a patriarchal society that thinks like, yeah, if you're not working, if you're not bringing in the bread and all of this, then, and men don't feel, men aren't supposed to feel, and stuff like that, then they're over fixating on that logical side of them. And then, yeah, that is a way where not only are they not using extroverted thinking properly, because whenever you're overdoing a function, that means you're not really using it properly. If you're just being overly nice with people, that's not using extroverted feeling properly. If you're being overly work, 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 and you're not really checking in with yourself and all of that, that's not using extroverted thinking properly. So I think that that's one of the ways in which like sometimes like that could come out. Um, yeah, that's the best that I have for right now. But that's a really good question.
It's a really good question. Thank you for asking that, G. Maybe that's a good. I'm gonna write that down later as a good blog article to write and get input on, because that's a good thought. And Denzel, thank you, because that's really good input as well. I know, even in my own life, I have INTJ preferences, and there's been a lot of times, when I still have 5 kids, but especially when there were babies and toddlers and things, where I had to rely on my extroverted functions a lot, and I was really not giving introverted intuition as much time. So, if you have a really busy workload, or you're a really busy parent, or you have a really full house, or whatever it is, you may find yourself over leaning on your extroverted functions and not giving your introverted functions enough time to really breathe. And then that's where they start getting warped, and you start having a more lopsided personality. And I have a comment here from Michelle. She says, parenting. Yeah, as an INFP, I can offer too many options, but it falls into the offer a choice between preferred outcomes parenting advice. Well, I guess. But I can end up confusing even myself if I do it too much. Yeah, I've noticed that with INPs, there's this, like, you don't have to get upset about this one thing. Here's 5 other things you could do. And if you're talking to a type that has intuition, that can be so encouraging and so beneficial. But then I had a friend who's an ISFJ, and her parent, I believe, was a ENFP. And when the ENFP parent gave her all these options and possibilities, she just wanted to go cry because it was triggering her inferior function to be given all these possibilities, and it was making her feel vulnerable or incompetent. And so it's really interesting. All of our functions can be seen and accepted by one person and loved, and at the same time another person might find that function almost overwhelming. So we'll get more into that as we go. And then there's a question from Katya. How is it in an argument with an ESTP, as I tried to solve it through extroverted intuition? Well, that could be part of a very long conversation, but ESTPs have extroverted intuition as the 5th function. No, not the 5th function, the 8th function in their function stack. And so they tend to have a really hard time solving a problem through extroverted intuition. They might just get overwhelmed and check out of something like that. They might take it the wrong way. But at the same time, extroverted intuition and extroverted sensing can have some things in common. They both like things being open-ended. They both like possibilities. If you can tie your extroverted intuition to something concrete, then it's going to be more readily accepted by the ESTP. All right, so let's move on here. So now I just have some examples of the auxiliary functions among the different types. So if you have auxiliary introverted intuition, ENFJs and ENTJs would both have auxiliary introverted intuition. I have insights and predictions to share with you that could help you pave your way towards a better future. This is kind of the mindset behind how they support others with this function. And I have an ENTJ dad, and how this would show up is he would see a vision I was working towards, and he would give me insights, or he would believe in me, and he would almost paint a picture of what my idea could become in 5 or 10 years. Now, Denzel also has auxiliary introverted intuition. So Denzel, I'd love to hear if you resonate with this.
Absolutely, 100%. I think that my greatest gift that I can give people is insight. Like I think that helping someone with, good advice on what might be really going on behind the scenes, what might be going on in the future, like, figuring out like, okay, this is what's going on right now. So what can we find out? Like what is the trajectory pointing toward, stuff like that. Really helping people understand situations, especially when it comes to like relationships and interpersonal matters. and helping people just pretty much have a vision to like follow, whether it be just one person and them following a vision to become a better version of themselves, or a whole society of people and helping us to become a better society overall. I think that that's definitely where I excel the most. And I could see that with other ENJs too.
Thank you, Denzel. And I think one of our favorites, Martin Luther King Jr., is a great example of this. He said, "I have a dream." Like, that was his famous quote. I mean, if there isn't a better example of auxiliary introverted intuition coming out in a supportive way, that would be it. He would inspire people with this vision he had of a better future. And that is such an amazing example of how auxiliary introverted intuition can work. We're moving on next to auxiliary extroverted intuition. I'm excited about this since we have several INPs here. I've thought of some ideas and connections that could spark new possibilities for your future or broaden your way of seeing things. So they opened windows where someone thought they were in a closed room with just concrete walls. All of a sudden they're like, "Oh, you didn't see this and this and this and this." And it can be very inspiring to people who feel stuck or to situations that feel hopeless. The extroverted intuitive, the type with extroverted intuition auxiliary function, can really guide people towards multiple possibilities or helping them see things in a new way. And this is one of the true gifts of extroverted intuition. And I actually was thinking about Katya's question about communicating, getting to an argument with an ESTP. And I think any two types can have a really amicable relationships, even if their cognitive functions aren't aligned. So I just wanted to say really quickly that even if your caring function, your auxiliary function, doesn't match someone else's functions, as long as your heart is evident in that relationship, you find a way to work through it and understand each other. So I just wanted to say that because sometimes people think, "Oh, well, I should just avoid relationships with these types of people because they're not going to understand my cognitive functions." And I think, I'm evidence, I think, in my own relationship that you can have very different functions from your partner and still have a wonderful time. And this is why this exploration of type is so important. Because once you understand how people care, you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls that are common in relationships. All right, so auxiliary introverted sensing, this would be ESTJs and ESFJs that have this. Their way of showing they care might be, they'll say, "I'll remind you of facts and lessons from the past to guide you towards a more stable and secure future." So these people, you're going through a hard time, they might remind you of a time when you overcame that same struggle before. Or they might remind you of a time when they overcame a similar struggle before. Or they might remind you of a time where someone in history overcame a similar struggle before, in a way to let you know, hey, you're not the first person who's encountered this dilemma. You're not alone. Other people have faced this trial and succeeded and gotten through it. And ultimately, introverted sensing, when it's in the parent position, the auxiliary position, wants to create stability and continuity for people. Wants to give the people that it cares about a sense of predictability and safety and comfort. Any thoughts on this, Denzel, by the way? I know I'm just jumping through these.
No, you're totally good. Yeah, I was thinking that's exactly it. Like, introverted sensing as a parenting function wants to, it's almost like how introverted intuition wants to provide that vision for you and that insight. Introverted sensing, like Susan said, is like telling, like, "Oh, this is what's happened in the past. This is like, you are like, this is what people have already been through in a certain way." But they also want to provide like the blueprint for you. So they want to like help you on like, this is the process. It's almost like a vision, but it's not something that's like kind of tailored for specifically you, and going into like new distances, but it's more like something that's been now replicated. It's like, we know that this works and we want to pass this wisdom down to you. I think that SI is like wisdom in a way. It's like, oh, from seeing this happen over and over and over and over and over again, then we want to pass down this wisdom, this experience to you so that you can follow it. And if you follow by these things, then you'll forever be on the right path. And so I think that that's kind of like how I see it. It's like they pass down the things that they've seen work for years, and then they want to like help you by giving that to you.
I completely agree. And one thing that, we haven't touched on and that I maybe should bring up now is, when it's overinflated. So unhealthy auxiliary function. So unhealthy introverted sensing can look like you have to do things the way they were done before. Like, don't innovate and don't. This is the template that I followed. This is the template my father followed. You need to follow this too. And so that's what it can look like when it's inflated. And the inflated introverted intuition might look like too much, like, no, you need to look ahead, but at with the opposite problem where it's too disconnected from the past, too disconnected from details and lessons from before, and maybe overly theoretical or overly detached from the reality of the experience. Auxiliary extroverted sensing. So if you are an ISFP or an ISTP, this would be your auxiliary function. I'll remind you of the beauty and opportunity of the physical world in the present moment to keep you mindful and satisfied. So ISTPs and ISFPs are really good at helping people tap back into what's real, what's relevant in the moment, what opportunities are available right now. Now, Denzel, you're married to an ISFP, so any thoughts on how this shows up, auxiliary extroverted sensing?
Yeah, I think that there's two special ways that it shows up. It can be, and I feel like we've been kind of like saying that for all of the functions so far, like how introverted sensing, like showing like what you went through or what other people have gone through, but then also like how you can replicate that for as wisdom for your life, and then introverted intuitions, like giving you the meaning of what's going on like right now, but then also a vision for what can happen in the future, kind of thing, and etc. For extroverted sensing in ISPs, I've noticed that they really do help you to just like relax and like be in the moment and like, hey, it's everything's gonna be all right. Like they just give you that like kind of like really like lax feeling like, yo, it's really not a big deal. Like this is going on, like, or don't worry about tomorrow right now. Let's just be here. Let's just be present. Let's just enjoy that there's air here, and that, oh, look at the fireflies in this way. Like they help you really to like notice like what's going on around you on a physical level and just be present with that and then find peace in that way. But I think they also are really good at helping you to go and do fun things. Like my wife, she, and this also goes back to like her not using it for herself as much. She, she enjoys like, doing active things, but she'll most do her active stuff if other people are doing it. So she tries to get other people to take dance classes with her, and she tries to get other people to like go on these hikes with her, and she tries to get like other people to like, there's another one that she was like doing like recently. It was just here and I forgot. Dang, yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, like she really likes to like be active, or like going to the gym and like, helping them to like be fit. Like, she'll take like me and two other people to the gym, and then she's like telling us like the workouts that we should be doing. But if it's down to like her going to the gym like by herself, then most likely she's not going to. And I feel like that's like, using the extroverted sensing like back to herself, like, parent yourself with your own function. So again, like how are you including yourself in that? But I've seen that like ISPs, they usually like to like be the ones to introduce you to a whole new world of whatever else type of exploration that they could do. And it's almost like, why haven't you done this before? It's like, yeah, I don't know. I think I was just waiting for somebody that I can show it to. Like it's more fun for them to have somebody else experience it, and them introduce the person to that experience. That's kind of like what I've noticed.
Thank you, Denzel. I think those are great examples. And I noticed a comment from Katya. That's what motivates me. How to solve some points with my dad. MBTI is one of the best ways to understand people more. And yeah, I think we were talking to, she's referencing when we were talking about using it to understand each other. And absolutely, I think it's a great way to make to forge stronger relationships with people. So auxiliary introverted feeling. If you're an ENFP or an ESFP watching this would be your auxiliary function. I'll remind you who you are and help you define what you really want. and stand for. So your life is in alignment with your true self. So ENFPs and ESFPs will defend what you want. If they see you like bending for other people, they'll be like, hey, stop that. You need to be who you are. Stop trying to be like whatever you think somebody wants you to be. And I've known ENFPs and ESFPs like this, that they'll be your biggest, staunchest defenders when it comes to not betraying yourself. Even if it means you're going to ruffle some feathers, even if it means you maybe have to step out of your comfort zone, they want you to come into yourself and be 100% authentic. Any thoughts on this one, Denzel?
Yeah, I think that is spot on. Like they will try to find out like, no, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? You know, like what about you? And so then they'll like make sure like, don't you betray yourself? Like, don't you betray how you feel? Like they really get into your motivation. Don't let him bully you like that. Like you're this, you're that. Like that's what I've experienced. It's like, oh, so they'll really like be the friend that like taps into, yeah, like what you want, who you are, stuff like that. And they help you to also figure out what that is for yourself. Like, how can you explore more of who you are, like, and really get in deep with who you are, so that that's the part of you that you don't betray. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed.
Yeah, and I think one day we should do a live stream about how the auxiliary and tertiary interact among the 16 types. Because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking ITJs, so ISTJs and INTJs, they want to be taken care of through introverted feeling. So there's actually this strong attraction often from ITJs and EFPs, because ITJs want to be taken care of through introverted feeling, and EFPs take care of people through introverted feeling. And then if you flip it, they both help each other in the same ways. But I think I'd get way too into the weeds in that right now, but I do want that to be a stream we do at some point. So yeah, this can be really powerful. I have an EFP friend who I just love talking to this person, because she helps me as an INTJ understand, well, that it's okay to just want something because I want it, and to know myself better, and to be okay feeling whatever I feel. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing. Moving on to auxiliary extroverted feeling. So if we have any INFJs or ISFJs who are watching, this is your auxiliary function. I will support you and nurture you, creating an atmosphere of warmth so you can feel connection and empathy. So extroverted feeling in the auxiliary position is usually really good at creating rapport with you, getting you to feel comfortable expressing yourself and creating intimacy, as Denzel said, with them. It's very empathetic. IFJs often can even get their own feelings mixed up with other people's feelings because they're absorbing other people's feelings. Any thoughts, Denzel, on auxiliary extroverted feeling?
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of touched on that a few times, but yeah, it's really like making sure that you're not just being in service mode, but you're connecting, and then you're helping other people to connect with each other as well on a deep level. So just like past the surface level and all of that, and like really getting like into like the deep. So I think that that is something that INFJs and ISFJs can do pretty well. Like when they're really getting into their extroverted feeling, they're like really like, you know, helping people to meet each other and to get in deep with each other and to feel connected and supported, and valued by each other. And then seeing like how having that community can help you with many other things in the long run.
Thank you. I agree. And then auxiliary introverted thinking. If you're an ENTP or an ESTP, this is your auxiliary function. I'll help you get to the roots of your beliefs and thoughts so that you can have clarity and solid footing to rest your worldviews upon. So for introverted thinking in the auxiliary position, it's about helping you clarify what you actually think, what is actually radically true, and helping you to have mental clarity. It could also show up in troubleshooting complicated issues for you. You know, as an example, usually TP types are the ones you call when you're like, my computer's not working. I don't know what to do. Because they can be very patient at troubleshooting these more complicated issues for you. So it can show up in I'm helping you organize your thoughts and helping you clarify your thinking. This isn't clarifying your feelings. That's not what it's as interested in. It's clarifying your thought process. So one of the monikers for the ENTP is the debater. A lot of people call them the debaters. But when you understand that this is their auxiliary function, this is their caring function, one of the reasons that they debate and argue is so that they can help you clarify your own thoughts. So a lot of times when ETPs argue with you, they're not doing it because they just want to mess with you, or they're not just for no good reason. A lot of times it's because they actually care that you have clean data, that you have good information, that you have rooted out your thoughts to find actual truth. Any thoughts on this, Denzel?
Yeah, I think that it's a lot like the introverted feeling that we were just talking about, where it's like, instead of like, no, but how do you feel and all of that, it's like, no, but what do you think? Yeah, no, I know that the rest of everyone over here, like, they think that Jesus is this or whatever. They usually go for the more controversial things, in my opinion. But it's like, but what do you think that you're not telling everybody? And then they help you to calibrate those thoughts. And and then they're like, okay, well, you think this, but why do you think it? And then they start playing that devil's advocate with you so they can help you really solidify like what your thoughts are. And so I think that that's like a very good like offering that they give you, especially with that introverted thinking being second, because the extroverted feeling is right behind it. So they do tend to have more patience for the people that they are like really like guiding through, more than like maybe, not always, but like for an ITP, they usually don't have that much patience. It's like, if you're just not getting it, then you're just not getting it. So they can sometimes get like a little bit frustrated, whereas like ETP is like, oh yeah, like this is my way to connect. So yeah, let me help you to let me help you like get through all of this. So yeah, I feel like that's like one of the best ways that they're able to like really help you like sharpen your thoughts.
Thank you. I completely agree. And auxiliary extroverted thinking. So if you are an INTJ or an ISTJ, this is your auxiliary function. I'll give you logical advice and help you organize your world and streamline processes to achieve the goals that you have for yourself. So this can look like, if you have a dream, you're like, someday I really want to write a book. They'd be like, okay, let's come up with, an outline. Or I found this master class by Neil Gaiman, and I think that you should watch this and learn how to do story structure. Or, let's set a plan so that, maybe every morning when you wake up, I've read that, if you drink some ice water, it helps clear your head. So drink a glass of ice water, get your journal, and just write for 15 minutes. I don't know, just giving you like strategies so that you can actually implement the goals and dreams that you have. And it may not look as like sporadic and whatever I was just saying. Like they'll probably give it to you in a more organized way. But that's a lot of times what auxiliary extroverted thinking looks like. So we've gone over how the auxiliary function looks for each of the personality types at this point. Again, I always feel kind of bad ending these because I really feel like we could do an hour-long session on just each function in the auxiliary position. So I never feel like I've given as much information as I want to. But I want to open this up now for any questions that you might have if you're watching this. Feel free, don't be shy, jump in with a question. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any questions about your auxiliary function or just anything type related that we can answer now. We have about 15 more minutes, so I would love to be able to answer any questions you might have during that time. Denzel, I didn't ask your thoughts about auxiliary extroverted thinking. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of like what I was saying earlier with they make the plan for you almost. It's like, oh, let me do it kind of thing. So it's like, here, I created this for you, and here I did this for you, and yet I created this for you. So it's like their love language is almost like creating the system for you in a way. Or yeah, pretty much like creating the system for you and like getting you through in that sense. And I think that being someone that's able to provide resources for you as well is like a very big thing. Like I have a few INTJ friends.
I feel like you're an INTJ magnet, Denzel.
I think so too. And Susan is definitely one of the ones that I'm thinking about right now, who really provides like a lot of resources. Like you ask Susan like one thing, and she's like, "Oh no," and then all of a sudden she's like, "Okay, well, I actually can. You can actually like do this, and then you can actually do that, and here, actually, I just sent you some money here, and then oh, you can sign up for this in this way," and it's just like, whoa, like, and then it's like, but it's such like a automatic thing for her, and it's just like how she just like parents and like shows the love. It's like, oh, like I have this resource, or I'm able to do this, I'm able to do that. And like I said, I have other INTJ friends who I know that are very similar in that way. Like I have an INTJ friend, Lauren, who's like, hey, so we're playing Pokemon together. And then she's like, hey, so I know that you actually really like the Pokemon game that we play. And I actually went ahead and I got a membership that's, however much this month. And, me and you, we can both share the membership and do this and what? Like, and then she'll like provide like actual resources in the Pokemon game. Like it's a game. Like she'll provide resources to be able to help us both go along the way. And it's like, man, like what would you do without TE? It's been like, oh, here, I've done this for you, or like I have this resource ready and handy for you in your time of need.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. A TE is very aware of resource and resource management. There's a question here from Linda. She says, what would be the difference between dominant introverted feeling and auxiliary introverted feeling? So dominant introverted feeling is what shows up for ISFPs and INFPs. So it's the air they breathe without even trying, typically. And so they're going to, without thinking, constantly kind of assess, how does this feel to me? What are my values about this? Am I living in accordance with my true self? And all these kinds of things. But it's a very internal process. This is associated with the spine of their personality. But when they reach out to help people, it's not as much in that outspoken FI way that maybe an EFP would do, where it's like, I have to take care of these people, so I'm going to speak out in defense of their values. Usually with IFPs, it is more of an internal personal process. It doesn't mean they won't ever speak out, because they absolutely will, but it is more internal. It's not the arms of their personality type. The arms of their personality type are either SE, extroverted sensation, or NE, extroverted intuition. So you'll see when they reach out to people, it's through a perceiving process. It's through intuition or sensing, more likely. So for an ISFP, as Denzel was saying, it might be more like if someone's having an issue or a struggle, hey, let's take some breaths and calm down. And let's just like tap into our bodies in the present moment. It's going to be okay. And really getting them into a good sensory place and to notice and to get mindful of the present moment. The FI is still there. The introverted feeling is still there. They still care about it, but they're going to create a safe sensory space for you to get into that. And they believe more that each person is in charge of their introverted feeling to a degree. Like you take time to create this. I almost think of it as like, an ISFP sees you struggling and they're like, okay, let me pull you out here. Let's get out of this busy crowded room. Let's go sit under the stars and let's just take some deep breaths. And it's like creating the sensory space for you to then process. Whereas maybe an ENFP would be like, what do you need? What do you want? It's the FI is more externally evident. What do you think, Denzel? Am I explaining that well?
Yeah, no, you're getting it like spot on in my opinion. The EFPs are always going to like trying to like motivate you to do what you want to do, and what do you feel, and yeah, like when I really like think of them, it's like it's really just like get into you, like who you are, and it's not that the dominant FI users aren't like that. Like they'll also like kind of be like that, but I think that they just more embody FI. Like they just more like they live their life the way that they think is most authentic, and then it's almost like they're leading by example. So that way, when you see them leading like so authentically, then you're like, man, I just want to kind of like be like that. and then they might like help you in that way. And I'm not saying that the way that the EFPs do it is bad or that they never embody it either, but they're just more vocal about like what they're doing in that way. I think that EFPs are also more vocal usually about their values, like so sometimes I guess like in a bad way it can sometimes come off as like value signaling. But like in other like I think that's the term, like value signaling is like, oh well, I don't really like this, or like I don't do this, kind of thing. But I think that with FI dominant types, they're not usually prone to doing that as much. I feel like they just kind of really do just seem to quietly go about their own business. Like if you do something that crosses one of their values or something, they usually won't really like lash out at you because the TE is like inferior. So it's just more of like, oh, I gotta stay away from that person. Whereas like the FI in the auxiliary position will have the TE like right behind it. So it's more of like a quick like, hey, you hurt me, you did this to me, or like you hurt my friend, something like that. So it can be, it's like supportive, but in like an aggressive way almost. That's how I see it.
Yeah, it's very like I think that's a good example. Like I have an ISFP daughter, and she's very accepting of of people, but she's not gonna just be like, "What do you want?" Just be like, I mean, she does. If she really cares about someone, she will be like, "Just be yourself," But very quietly exudes her own self, regardless of what anyone thinks she needs to be. She's going to be who she is. And the ESFP that I know who has auxiliary introverted feeling will be like, hey, like you said, hey, you're not being authentic, and you need to be, because you're awesome the way you are. And it's like, how like Robin Williams, he's an ENFP. I think everyone agrees that he's an ENFP. It's kind of this like outspoken push to be authentic and to be real and to grasp your true core. And they're both really powerful, but in different ways. And then there's a comment from Umesh: auxiliary function is the problem for the solution it's trying to prove. Double-edged. So I'm not 100% sure on the question. Let me look at it one more time. Is the problem for the solution it's trying to prove? So is the question, is it a solution for the problem? I'm not sure on this one. Do you understand it, Denzel?
I'm wondering if it's saying that the auxiliary function solves the same problem that, like, the auxiliary function solves a problem that it also causes. That's what I'm guessing. So, like, again, like
Okay.
the IFJs, like if their problem is like, I have a desire to connect with people, but I don't like connecting with people, and I'm over like helping, like I overserve and everything. But then they start using that same function that makes them have that desire to connect with people in a more healthy way, then it solves the issue that function kind of like started. So it's almost double edged because it's like, yeah, they wouldn't have that desire if they didn't have extroverted feeling, but extroverted feeling also has a solution to it. So then that's what I'm thinking. Maybe I just totally annied that and brought a whole bunch of meaning into it that's not really what the person meant. But yeah.
I actually think that's an interesting thing. I want to think on that, because that might be true. That's actually a really good point. And then G says, is the best person to teach you to implement a certain cognitive function those who have it as an auxiliary function? And I would say yes. I refrain from really black and white statements when it comes to type, but I do think that when someone has that function in an auxiliary position, because there's the auxiliary function, it has more of a supportive, protective tone to it. If you know someone who's a healthy version of that type, then they want to teach you it. They want to give this to you. Like I said, they think it's the thing that everyone needs for their best, for their own good, right? And when you have some information that you feel people need to know for their own good, you're usually pretty anxious to share it, right? If you saw someone walking in the woods and they're like, oh, what's this? And they're about to reach out and eat a poisonous berry, you'd be like, oh no, stop. And this is kind of how we feel with our auxiliary function. If people want help using that, we usually are like, oh yes, you need to know this. So I would say yes, if you want to understand a function or implement it more in your life, seeking out someone who has that in the auxiliary position is a really smart move.
Yeah,
So thanks for
unless if
that.
you have that function in your auxiliary, then that's when it's better to look at somebody who's using it as a dominant, in my opinion. So
Good point.
yeah, like I feel like if you're using if you have like NI in another place, like any other place, like in your stack or whatever, and then you look at an ENJ, then they're using NI, in my opinion, like a lot more. Like you're seeing it because the SE is right there too. So then you see like how the NI is like actually being used, and it's coming into fruition in certain ways, stuff like that. But if you have the NI in the auxiliary, like in ENJ, probably is best learning more about their NI from an INJ, because you're not going to learn as much from another ENJ, in my opinion, unless if they have developed. Like even with Martin Luther King Jr., I feel like he learned a lot of what he has from Gandhi, who was an INFJ. And so it's kind of like that, like, oh, like, yeah, yeah, that's kind of like how I saw it. So
I love that. That's an amazing tip right there. You want to develop your auxiliary function more. You can even just read about people who were dominant in your auxiliary function if you don't know anyone. And I think that's a great tip, Denzel. Thank you for sharing that. And then Katya says, maybe it could be an extra live stream, as you guys said, but if auxiliary is matching with others tertiary, does that mean then that they can have a stronger connection easier? And I would say often, I don't want to say it's the magic bullet and that it always works, but often that's true. If they can, a lot of times it's an extrovert introvert blend. So for example, if an ENFJ would have auxiliary introvert intuition and they connect with an ISFP who has tertiary introverted intuition, right? They have to get past the extrovert introvert roadblock, which sometimes can be a roadblock. Sometimes the extrovert's busy doing things with a lot of people and the introvert's like over in the corner reading a book or something. But if they can get past that and they can really connect with each other, then I really do believe that can build a really strong connection, because an ISP has tertiary NI meeting an ENJ with auxiliary introvert intuition. It would be like, oh, that's what I need in my life. And they're thinking, this is what I want to share with you. And Denzel's a great example of that, because he's an ENFJ with an ISFP wife. So he has parent introverted intuition, and she would have child introverted intuition. And she would have parent extroverted sensing, and he would have child extroverted sensing. Yeah. And so there's a natural chemistry, I think, in that dynamic.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like with me and my wife, which today's our 5-year anniversary. Woot woot. Yeah, we're gonna
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah, we throughout our whole relationship, it's been very interesting seeing how like I give her a whole bunch of NI, and she like takes it, she absorbs it, and she has her own NI nuggets that she throws up every once in a while, and it's like, whoa, this is really brilliant. But then a lot of times she brings me a lot of the SE. So like if my NI is getting like a little bit too lofty, then she's like, well, but that's not really like realistic. Like you have to think about it more like this way. And like, but she's not taking away the whole NI. She's just like helping me bring the NI more to ground so that I can actually do something with whatever I'm planning. And it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And she's also great with like, whenever it comes to us actually going out to do stuff, like for example this anniversary weekend that we're about to have, like she's really good, which goes back to the SE parenting that we were talking about. She's the one who finds like all of the events that are in Atlanta, all of the different festivals, all the different concerts, like all of that. And it's like, whoa, like she's the one who plans all of that. Like she's the one who's like, oh, this is what's going on today, this is what's going on this weekend, this is what's going on next weekend. And then she pretty much like has everyone, kind of like not everyone, well, yeah, no, everyone too, like are like the friends that we sometimes would hang out with and everything. Like she'll plan certain things like around that. Whereas like for me, I like that's always fun after I've like spent so much time inside. So it's funny, Susan, that you're saying like the extrovert versus introvert thing, because when it comes to that, she likes to be like, okay, I have to get outside and like do something because her extroverted sensing. Whereas like for me, I can sit inside all day and then like just be like talking to people and like with intuitive conversation and stuff like all day and like just really like getting that in. And then she's the one who's like, all right, let's get outside and like do something. And I'm like, oh yeah, I should touch grass. But then as we're outside, then I'm like telling her all the stuff that I learned, like after talking to Susan for a few hours, and then boom, boom, boom. And so it's like this dance. And then there's another ENFJ ISFP couple that we know that they kind of have like the same, like a similar dynamic. So it's very interesting. And then you see this a lot with ETPs and IFJs too, where it's like, again, the ETP is like talking to the IFJ, and it's like, okay, yeah, I know that you do this for your dad, and I know that you do this, but like, but what do you actually think about this though? Like, what do you actually, whatever? And like, are you really living in honor with like what your actual logical thoughts are? And then the IFJ is like, wow, that's great. And it's like, and I know that you maybe say these things like offhand, and these people like they bring you out, whatever, but like maybe real true intimacy will be you finding people who actually are happy with the thoughts that you have. Like, have you thought about joining this community? And maybe they'll actually be appreciative and you won't have to hide your TI thoughts. And so they really help each other like in that way. But again, it's not like a silver bullet though. And I do think that EFPs and ITJs also have like a very similar dynamic.
Yeah, I think it's, when you have the same middle functions, but in a different order, it's like you have the same arms. According to BB's model, let me bring that up again, but you would have the same arms. Like that's the way you take care of people, and it's the way you want to be taken care of. And I'm just gonna put the visual up here for anyone who might find it helpful. And so, yeah, if you are in a relationship or a friendship where the other person has the same functions in the arms of their personality type, then there's probably going to be some kind of like natural getting each other or feeling gotten, feeling like this person sees me. And so I think that's a really powerful thing. And then Mike says, my auxiliary is extrovert intuition. When I mentored younger workers, I did well with some, but others I suspect drove them crazy with too much brainstorming. And, that's the hard thing about being human, as we really do think our auxiliary function is the right one to help and support people, or our dominant, but often our auxiliary. And it's frustrating because it can be so inspiring and helpful to some people. And then with other people, it can just fall flat. And you can be left scratching your head and feeling like, man, I was trying so hard to show I cared. And it just like, why didn't they accept this gift I was giving to them? It's like you handed them a perfectly wrapped package. They unwrapped it. They threw it on the floor and stepped on it. And you're just like, didn't you see the love that I put into that? And yeah, I think that one thing we have to understand about types sometimes is that unfortunately, we can sometimes trigger people, for lack of a better word, just by using our functions the way they are, or get them stressed. And a lot of times, like in this example, it might be that they were ISJs. And so, like I said, I've known quite a few ISJs who, if they're not in the right space, especially if someone's throwing a lot of possibilities and brainstorming at them, they just start feeling they're drowning. And because the inferior function is one, and we'll get into this in a couple of weeks, but the inferior function is one that carries a lot of vulnerability with it. And so we tend to feel vulnerable when we are using it. Like, oh, maybe I'm not doing this right. Maybe I'm going to make a fool out of myself. Maybe people will laugh at me. Maybe I shouldn't do this, especially publicly. And so, yeah, if you have inferior extrovert intuition, you're an ISTJ or an ISFJ, and then someone who comes along with auxiliary extrovert intuition is like, look at all these possibilities. Let's brainstorm a solution. You might feel like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How can I get out of this situation? I can't think of anything. And all these ideas, they aren't matching up with my lived experience, so they seem kind of irrelevant to me. That can be the situation. The good thing is, Mike, that like I'm sure that your NE is really valuable and really will be accepted and prized by a lot of people. I don't know if you've had much experience with ESJs. They have tertiary extrovert intuition. And so for them, that's how they'd like to be taken care of. And even other intuitives can enjoy that. So Yeah, we all run into issues where sometimes what we're offering to people just it's not seen, it's not accepted and valued for what it could be. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Denzel. I know you might have to run because I know it's a little bit past 5 or
Oh,
6 your time.
you're good. We're doing our anniversary dinner later, and then we're celebrating for the weekend tomorrow. So we're good.
Oh, awesome. I hope you
Yeah.
have an amazing time, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. But yeah, no, I think that again, like Susan really like hit the nail on the head with everything. And it's sad, but I think we should just also like remember stuff like this, like I used to offer I used to offer my NI insights a lot to people who really didn't care for it, like a lot. And one of my favorite quotes, which sometimes I don't like that it's my favorite quote because I don't like leaving myself in a victim position. I always try to like whenever view myself in a victim position, I'm like, no, how can I like push past this? But sometimes I really do just like think to myself, like, man, like when Jesus said that not to cast your like, oh, Jesus said that a prophet is only without honor in his own home. I was like, man, I totally felt that. Like, I totally feel that, you know. But then also, there's another verse that talks about like not casting your pearls to swine, and that's something that now I'm always thinking about. Like, okay, wait, my insights are pearls, and no offense to people, but like the people who don't really care for it. If I'm like trying to like share certain things that are my insights and everything, and I'm trying to give them a gift and they're looking at it and it's just kind of like and they don't really see the value in it, then I shouldn't share that with them. Because if you give like, what's the sense of giving somebody an $100 bill if they're only like 3 years old? They don't know what that is. They don't know what they're holding. And that's no offense to the 3-year-old. The 3-year-old just literally doesn't know. Like, and so they can't accept this as a gift. When we're all younger and we're getting clothes, it's like, thanks, but I wanted a video game. And then when we start getting older, it's like, oh, finally, socks, underwear, thank you. And but you didn't know that that's what you needed when you were like younger. Maybe you didn't really need that. So I think that keeping in mind like the different people that want different gifts and then providing that for them is like one of the best things to do. Like and knowing that when not to give your pearl to somebody who won't see it as a pearl, but they'll just see it as a rock.
That is such an amazing example. I love that. Thank you, Denzel.
Thank you. I'm giving insight. There you go.
I'm honored that you could give that because that means I'm not a swine in your
Yes.
And then DJ asked, I'm sorry if I missed this. Can your second function loop with your fourth function? Not a lot of material is written about this, but I think it can. I think it can because I've lived it many times. Because I'm very much an introvert, but when I had 5, when I had like a 18-month-old and a newborn baby, and I was trying to run a business and support my family, and I was trying to do so many things, I had no time for any introversion whatsoever. I was definitely looping back and forth between extroverted thinking and extroverted sensing. And I've seen it with other introverts and I've seen it with extroverts. I know an ENFP who works really hard. They're always in a place with people. They almost never are alone. And they're always busy. So they're constantly looping back and forth between extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking. And it means that they're very impulsive. They're much more impulsive. They're much more, I hate to say this, but bossy, because the extroverted thinking can have kind of a bossy tone to it if it's not tempered by the introverted functions. I've seen this with ENTJs or ESTJs. They're looping back and forth between extroverted thinking and extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition. So I think yes. Sorry, that was a dominant tertiary loop example. But yes, you can loop back and forth between your second and fourth functions, I believe. What about you, Denzel? Do you think people can do that?
I think it's a lot less common, but I wouldn't say that it's impossible, especially like with what Susan's saying. It's like, oh yeah, that definitely like happens. I personally think that it's a lot less common. Like I see other people, like when I coach them, it's almost always in a dominant tertiary loop. And then sometimes they'll have grips whereas it's just the inferior function that's like holding them. And it's like, okay, you need to get back into your dominant and integrate that auxiliary, because you're focusing too much on that inferior. And the gateway, the doorway to your inferior is your auxiliary function. If you're not using your auxiliary function, you're not really going to get too much from your inferior function. And so I feel like that's something. But looping in that way, like I think that's when you're like in an extremely like not good place. Like and I think that I could definitely see how like an environment would really push certain types into that space where it's like I have met people like who like, yeah, they could be like a TE dominant type, but then because they're a woman and they grew up in a place where it's like, you're not allowed to be the boss, or you're not allowed to like do this, then they just kind of stick to like, you know, their SI FI loop or their NI FI loop, and they just really stick on that because they don't feel permission to actually like TE. But they're gonna find some way to like let that come out because it's their dominant function. And then that's when, you know, it's gonna come out like in unhealthy ways. So I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but just not as common as the dominant tertiary. Just in case, you know, if anybody's like, oh, maybe I'm actually like this other type, and it's just like an auxiliary inferior loop. It's like most likely not. That's probably like the dominant tertiary loop, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, I think it's very environment dependent.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So like, yeah, if you're an extrovert and you are in a lifestyle where you can't extrovert much,
yeah,
then yeah, you could be in a loop. Or if you're an introvert and you're in a lifestyle where, I don't know, you're working 8 hours in a big group of people, and then you come home and you've got a million kids running around all over the place, then you might be in a, you know, an auxiliary inferior loop. So I think it's, you know, if you feel like you're in that kind of loop, look at your life, and be like, okay, am I an introvert that's being forced to extrovert all the time, or am I an extrovert that's being forced to introvert all the time? Am I not, you know, giving myself this opportunity? Or like Denzel said, maybe you grew up in a situation where you were berated for your dominant function. Like, you can't do that. That's not okay. And so because of that, you leaned into your auxiliary more. It's possible. Yeah, I do think dominant tertiary loops are more common, but I do think that auxiliary inferior ones do happen. It's just, yeah, looking at your life and your environment will help you narrow down whether that's actually happening to you. And then one last question from Michelle: is this loop why INFPs can't get started on things? I think INFPs, when they get into a introverted feeling, introverted sensing loop, do have a hard time getting started. That's just like, they get in their feelings, they get into their inward, like a lot of introspection, and then also get into their rituals. Like they have like, I wake up and I have my cup of tea and I watch my favorite show, and at night I read my favorite book, and I like, you know, I feel like they're very like ritualistic when they're in a loop. And that's not always a bad thing to have some rituals and things, but it's so much that way that they're not, they have a harder time putting their ideas into action, because our extroverted functions are much more about action in the external world.
Yeah.
So
also, they're afraid to try new things. That's another thing, like where it's like they can't get started on it because like they'll be like, oh no, but like I'm just so used to this routine. I'm so used to like life looking like this, and so I don't really want to like change that like too much. And then that's, you know, like that risk, like, you know, comes out. But then also with having the TE inferior, then it's like, I don't even know how to start. So then they might just have the ideas, but then it's like, where do I go? How do I really get started? And it's like, you're going to get it while in motion. That's always going to be the thing for the IFP. Like while you're in motion, while you're like actively exploring, that's when the ideas are going to be coming to you.
That's really good advice. Thank you, Denzel. Yeah, and if you're an IFP and you're struggling with extroverted thinking, you can also find an ITJ. Get some extroverted thinking parent to help you, you know, because a lot of times I've known some IFPs are like, oh my gosh, you have the most amazing ideas. Your brain is so incredible. And they're like,
He's
but
talking
I can't
about
do
my wife.
Well, and it's just like, oh, here's and but the only issue is sometimes ITJs might overwhelm the IFP with strategies, and the IFP is like, oh my gosh, this is too much, because it's the inferior function for them. So they need it in bite-sized doses rather than a total onslaught of information. But I know we are going a little bit past time now, so I've got to go fix some dinner for my kids. And I know, Denzel, you got to get ready for your anniversary dinner. Thank you so much for taking time. I did not know it was your anniversary. It's the kind of friend I am.
Oh,
But
please,
happy
stop.
no.
You're not. I feel like the only people who remember are the people who know that song by Earth, Wind, and Fire, "The 21st Night of September." Yeah,
Oh,
that's
I
so.
don't. Okay.
Yeah, see, it's not your job to remember. It's my job. You're okay. But
Well,
thank
I hope you
you.
have. I hope you and Jamila have an amazing anniversary, and I hope thank everyone who came in today to watch this. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your patience as I struggled with my technology over here. I know that was frustrating. Thank you for that. And if you want to get more clarity on your personality type, if you're not sure what it is, or if you have someone who else in your life who is struggling to figure out the personality type, go to denzelmensa.com. I don't know, Denzel, if you're in a rush to go. If you have a minute, you could tell people a little bit about your profiling services.
Yeah, denzelmensa.com. I'll sit down and interview you. And sometimes it's within even like 1 or 2 sessions. And then we find out not only what your best fit type is, but why that would be your best fit type. So like we make it like really personal. And then if you want to start coaching, like how can I become a better version of myself through that type lens, then I can really help you to do that as well. So that you're not just operating as like a natural ENTJ, but now it's like, oh no, I'm operating as like a highly efficient ENTJ in my own style kind of thing. So I'm really good with that. I really like relationship coaching as well. That's also a service that I offer. And I can help you and your partner, or just you or just your partner, whatever it might be. So yeah, if you go to denzelmensa.com, find me over there. And if any of the time slots don't suit you, like I try to put the time slots to where I'm almost always going to be available. But if any of them like don't suit you, because of different time zones and stuff like that, then just email me, because those are the ones where it's like, okay, I have a session at 9 p.m. because this person in China has a different time zone or whatever. And so we're always going to like miss each other. So I just have to like mentally prepare for to like have a session at 9 p.m. rather than like always, just keeping slots open. So that's all. So just email me if there's anything like that.
Thank you, Denzel. And yeah, he's the person I send people to if they're not sure on their type. He's really, really good and really easy to talk to as well. And if you would like to find out more about the auxiliary function or more about your personality type at all, you can check out my website at psychologydunkie.com. I have over 1,000 articles on personality type and an in-depth article on the auxiliary function and how it shows up for each of the 16 personality types. I also have written a book about type called Discovering You, Unlocking the Power of Personality Type. You can see this on Amazon, or you can find it on my website. And this will also go in depth into the 16 personality types as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Next week, I need to clarify with Denzel, but next week we're probably going to be getting into the tertiary function. And if you watch this one, you really want to watch that one as well, because they both relate. So hope to see you next week. And thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.